Thank you very much for joining us again. It's a great honor to have you here. Me, especially coming from Czech Republic, it's great to finally introduce a Czech guest in the European Debate Initiative and formally at our University of Amsterdam. Once again, thanks so much for coming. But short introduction. I believe that you studied theoretical cybernetics and mathematical informatics in Brno at today's Masaryk University. You were one of the youngest board members of the Czech National Bank, and afterwards you became the vice governor for many years, I believe. And well, before you went into politics, you were the director for Czech Republic of Deloitte. So an interesting experience in the private sector as well. And now you are in the European Parliament for the European People's Party. And you're the first vice chair of the Economic and Monetary Committee in the European Parliament. Did I miss something, or?
No, you didn't miss anything important. I'm quite sure.
I mean, looking at your career, it really fascinated me that actually after working for 4 or 5 years in Deloitte, and one of the biggest names in the Czech Republic, I believe, for economic students, you went to public sector again, and to European public sector, the European Parliament. How did that happen? And maybe if you can put yourself into that, or our guests into that perspective, it would be very great.
You know, I don't know. And first of all, it's a great pleasure to be with you. Obviously, I would enjoy much more to be in Amsterdam, but this is where we are, and we should be fortunate to having all these fantastic platforms to keep working, keep meeting people. And this is one of the few positive things that we will get from this terrible pandemic. Concerning your question, obviously I'm a little bit surprised where I am, I must say, but I don't see that as a public sector, because this is really the politics. And I never thought about it. This was not my ambition. I very much enjoyed my 18 years, I guess, something like 18 years in the central bank. And what was the most fascinating is to start from lowest possible level you can imagine when you join the bank as quite a young person. You are fighting to get your chairs and your telephone in 1991. And then ending up as a vice governor. This was a fascinating job and a fascinating time. But later on, starting too early in the board means that you finish too early in the board, because normally people at the central bank boards don't serve unlimited period of time. I had 2 full terms, and that's maximum that you can get in the Czech Republic. So I was quite certain that I will go to private sector. This is what I did. I worked for Deloitte, and this was a very good experience. But then I have got several offers to go to politics, and one of the reasons was that I was always active in public debates on economy and sometimes on more broad issues. But I always, I guess from good reason, refused to go to politics. I have got offers to be a finance minister, actually even from current prime minister. It was a very wise decision to not go for that, obviously. But when I have got a proposal to run for party that I prefer for European elections, I said that this is kind of last chance, or I will try to do something myself, or I should not keep advising the others through articles in media, interviews, how poorly they are doing. So this was just kind of effort to try yourself. It sounds pathetic, but to try to make the world a little bit better place. So this is the effort. When I started, I was just below 50. Now I'm 54. My kids are getting a little bit older. They are still at school, but they are not very small. So I said once I should try and to see if you can do something, or to see it's to understand that it's impossible. The European politics was for me quite a clear choice. I always believed in a united Europe, even at the time when I didn't know a lot about it. So I intuitively always saw that it's a great thing. And I always had a feeling in Czech Republic that people don't appreciate that enough. So I first of all I merged that effort to do something with ability to present that EU and our joint common Europe is a great thing for people. So this was the key motivation. But I must say, looking backwards, it's now my 6 years in politics. Looking backwards, I was not equipped enough. I didn't know about the politics enough. I didn't know about how the European Parliament works. So this was very, very steep learning curve at the beginning, I must say.
Yeah, maybe if you can share now that you've already been in the European Parliament for 6 years, your expectations and now the reality that you're facing. Maybe that changed from your expectations, and what is actually the reality of the European Parliament at the moment, from your perspective?
Okay, we can go into very details, but it's very hard to understand for people that are not every day in the European Parliament. But I would say two main findings. The first that was very positive is that in Czech, in Prague, I always felt a little bit kind of alone by being pro EU, trying to defend what is done EU, on EU level, and to express how important it is for our future, for my kids, for my family, for their kids. What was very positive was to find out that there are so many people like me in the European Parliament, those who are really very enthusiastic about this fantastic project, and not because they are getting money from EU, their country are getting money, or they are on pay list of European institutions, but because of they are looking into the past and they understood that that's the best way by far. And actually, in the last few years, we understood that teaming up together, dealing with big challenges, big threats together, that's the only way how to win. So this was the first positive impression that I still keep. Obviously, when you get into the fights on details, on legislation, on points of view, it's easy to forget about it. So I must to remind myself about it, how great it is, and that most of the people are actually on the board and they are thinking this way. The second very important lesson that I didn't think about it before is that politics is about compromises. You shouldn't go to politics and to say, this is my view, that's the only truth. Anyone who doesn't agree with me is idiot. You can't work in politics like that. First of all, you must be ready to listen to the others, understand that maybe there are different points of view because they are living in different country. Maybe their country is different. Maybe they have a different tradition. They have different experiences. And before getting into the conclusion that they are wrong, you should try to understand what they are thinking about, and at the same time to be ready to do the compromise. And this is the biggest and the most difficult things in the politics. First of all, compromise are difficult to reach. And it's very difficult to find out what is the good compromise and what is the bad compromise. And the second, even worse, in 21st century, the compromises are difficult to sell. If you come from important meeting and you would say, I made 9 out of 10 my goals, then I can bet that the journalist will be grilling you, why didn't you make the 10th, the last one? And this is completely wrong, because Common Europe can work only if it's good for everyone. So everyone will get at least something, and this could be reached only through compromises. And finding out what is the good compromise and what is bad compromise, this is something that is incredibly complicated.
Right. Well, perhaps we can move on to your main activity in the European Parliament. But before we jump into it, I want to remind everyone in the audience to feel free to ask questions in the chat. We will consider it and ask the questions directly to Mr. Niedermayer. So in each topic, feel free to ask questions. And I would ask first of all about the Economic and Monetary Affairs Committee, perhaps one of the most influential committees in the European Parliament, maybe one of the most important ones. Could you perhaps outline the main activities, the main areas that you're looking at, and the main affairs at the moment for our audience?
Obviously, you all know how the European politics works, but just maybe 2 sentences or 1 or 2 sentences at the beginning. The European Parliament is co-legislature, so that means that we are part of legislative process. So as every committee, we are responsible for we call it files or dossier that are within our responsibility. We are the ones who are studying the dossier, who is proposing amendment, and who is bringing that for the vote to the plenary. So this is the legislative work that is most important. But maybe because the European Parliament lacks the legislative right, so that means we cannot propose the legislation. We can only amend the legislation or to refuse. There is very extensive business of its own non-legislative reports, and this is the second part of the work of any committee. So that means deciding what is the topic and then putting together non-legislative work that is just expressing the political will of Parliament, and also sometimes demanding the Commission, who is the Commission has monopoly for legislative proposals, to prepare the legislation. So this is for the beginning. But you are right, obviously each committee calls itself the most important, so obviously I must say the same. But I would say that the range of activity is very, very wide, very wide. And one thing that at least I understood in Parliament, maybe I saw that when I was coming, that I will be able to follow almost everything in my committees and the most important thing across the Parliament. When you start to work in Parliament, you understand that you must move 1 notch lower. So that means to understand about important files in your committees and have at least idea about the biggest things in the legislation. So I must say that without help of my staff in my office, I would be able to follow only such a small part of our agenda. With their help, I can do a little bit more. It's very extensive. As it says, it covers the economic and monetary area. The monetary is a little bit misleading because as a former central banker, I have full sympathy and full support for independence of the European Central Bank in the area of monetary policy. So this is kind of just a peak of the iceberg, and this is only the discussion with, I don't know, with Madame Lagarde or with previous presidents of ECB. We are very lucky to have Mr. Draghi as the head of European Central Bank. But obviously, we are not making any decisions in the area of monetary policy. We are just listening and we are just debating. And this is one of the most refreshing part of our works. But the fiscal policy is more important because European Union has its own fiscal rules proposed by German Finance Minister Theo Weigel, the famous Stability and Growth Pact. Since that, we went through several evolutions of the system, and we are obviously still far away from the functioning. And this is the area where is the link between fiscal and the monetary union, because we have the monetary union through called Eurozone, and it has something to do with the fiscal policy, where the majority of the fiscal policy is in hands of central bank and the national member states, and the fiscal policy of the European Union is very small, but this is still something that it's very important to discuss. So I mean the fiscal rules, I mean the recommendations for the economic policies, and so on. Then the other very important file is is the regulation of financial sector, where obviously to create level playing field, to create a European financial sector, we need a European regulation. We need probably less regulation in member states and more European regulation. And this is where we are definitely co-legislature, and we are playing very important role. Last not least, I want to mention the issue that occupied, I would say, most of my time in the last legislation, and this is the area of tax policy and money laundering or other very wrong things. Here I must also admit that in the area of taxation, the responsibility of Parliament is very limited. Taxation on European level is a matter of unanimity among the member states. And when there is a decision based on unanimity, we are just consulted. But nevertheless, I guess we were able to play quite an important role and push progress forward on the EU level. In the area of money laundering, it's different. It's an ordinary legislative procedure, so that means we play a full role. So this is just in a nutshell, I guess, the area of the biggest involvement of the econ. But I must say the weight of each part depends on the circumstances. And due to different scandals, you probably remember LuxLeaks, Panama Papers, and so on. In last legislation, the tax agenda was one of the really very important, despite of limited decision-making role of the parliament. After the election, it looks like kind of reset, like if you press Ctrl-Alt-Del, and this agenda was completely on the side, and all debate was about the climate change. And it has obviously many economic dimensions. For example, taxonomy of investment. This is very important. So it looks like this will be the priority. But with the corona crisis, there is more pressure on economic policies. We were able to put together, I would say, for the first time, kind of centralized anti-cyclical fiscal policies to so-called next generation EU budget. And this was the moment when again the econ start to play the role. I'm very sure that this agenda of more efficient tax collection, fighting the tax avoiding, tax fraud, will get back again, because the countries will emerge from the crisis with very high stock of debt. And in order to stabilize it and gradually at least decrease the relative level of debt, so that means debt to GDP, we must be very efficient in collecting taxes, and we cannot afford as big loopholes as we have now.
Yes, indeed. The last point you made brings us to the second topic, which indeed are the tax havens in the European Union. One of the unspoken things, and really, I guess, one of the hardest challenges of the European Union, especially from the economic point of view. It's also partially the reason that we have you here, because you wrote a great article to one of the Czech newspapers regarding the leave of Unilever and Dutch Shell company from, well, potential, from the Netherlands to the UK, and a law that is preparing to punish those companies with a one-time tax, which is just a specific case and just a puzzle of the whole problem. In that article, you mentioned that every year 90 to 150 billions of euros are missing from the European member states countries through these tax havens. And I think you quoted the Tax Justice Network, that 4 countries, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Switzerland, and the United Kingdom, are responsible for 70% of those losses. So I would like to know your opinion about well, your approach in the Econ Committee to such a problem. I mean, we have well, 28 soon 27 countries in the system, and it seems that something is not working, and has been working for quite a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, you are fully right. It doesn't work. It doesn't work well, and especially in times like this, we can't afford it because if, for example, big multinational firms wouldn't pay the fair taxes, the others will have to pay. After all, most likely this will be individuals and middle income individuals, because the richest people are as efficient in avoiding paying tax as the multinationals. And from very poor people, you cannot, you don't have a lot to take from. So it's a very serious issue, especially in time like this. But I should say, before we move to corporate taxation, that there are more layers of problems in collecting the taxes. One of the easiest way how to, in my view, improve the EU collection of taxes is to improve the VAT system. VAT in most countries is the biggest tax collected. It's quite a good tax. It's easy to collect, and it is progressive, because richer you are, more you spend, so you pay more tax. But to my huge frustration, member states are not able to make a last step and to avoid the biggest loophole, that is now the cross-border trade within the EU member state, that is tax-free, and this movement, or real or just declared movement of goods across the border, stays at the beginning of many tax frauds. So it's frustrating, and in this and here we have much more robust figures than figures on corporate avoidance that you quoted rightly from my article, because I wouldn't dare to estimate the figure on corporate tax avoidance. It's so tricky, but people like Tax Justice Network, they dare to do it. But on VAT collection, we have a commission estimate that I guess is quite robust, and it says, I guess it's more than 100 billion euro a year. You know, this is roughly the same amount as all EU budget, and this is what we are losing. The second very important area, in my view, is how to tax new economy. This is not only about Google, Facebook, and Amazon. This is about the problem that tax system, as we are using now, was created probably, I don't know, 50 years ago. And this was the time when you can easily find that in this building there is headquarters of the company. Here are the workers. Here are the products. This is what they have as revenues. These are costs. This is the difference, and give me 20%. Very easy. But these days, a lot of firms operate in our market, and they don't have such a permanent establishment. They even don't need to be presented at the market. But at the same time, they are participating in the market. They are making money by selling goods to our citizens. They are making huge profit, like Airbnb, for example. But through different legal structures, they are trying to completely avoid the taxation. Even firms like Google, if you're in Czech, if you're a small businessman and you book the advertisements via Google for Czech users, most likely you will sign the contract with some Irish Google. Google has office in Prague, Czech Republic, but this is not booked through them because they don't want to pay taxes in Czech Republic. They will pay taxes elsewhere. So this is not about punishing these firms by high taxation, but about making the equal conditions for those who are actually located in your economy pay taxes, and those who operate across the borders. And this is the biggest challenge. And this is the challenge that cannot be solved by Dutch, by Czech, even by French. And this is even not a challenge that can be efficiently solved by European Union. This is something that should be solved globally. So that's why we commissioned OECD to come with the proposal. It's complicated because they want to build agreement, and because of US president is who he is, he step out from the agreement to move forward. But we must find a solution. Now going to that corporate taxation, why it's so important? I guess there are two reasons. The first, you quoted, and that means that we are losing money. The biggest corporations and ultra-rich people, they can twist around their legal structures in order to not pay the tax in the jurisdiction where they don't need to pay tax. And after all, they pay very low effective rates on the taxation. And this is bad because if someone doesn't pay, the others have to pay instead. But there is a second layer that I guess is very, very important. And this is distortion of the competition. Because these sophisticated tricks that are allowing people not to pay taxes are complicated. You need tax advisors. You need operate in many different countries. And logically, they are available only for big companies. So if you are a small or medium-sized company, you are disadvantaged at the market. Those of you who study the economy, you know concept of economy of scale, or the increasing market power. So these people are disadvantaged by being small or medium-sized, and on the top of that, they pay much higher taxes. So this is very serious breach of the market of the fair market composition. So that's why it's very important to look at it. But here I must say that there are many different solutions how to deal with this issue. And I am definitely not in favor of prohibiting the tax competition. I guess it's very important. And this is not because I'm coming from, let's say, center-right parties, but I can guarantee you that if there is not chance to have certain level of tax competition between the states, we will just see increases of tax rates all over the world, because for governments it would be always easier that instead of economize on expenditure side to increase the revenues through increase of the taxes. And we know that if we tax really heavily, and we do tax heavily in some areas, then there is small incentive to do the economic activity. So that means people are moving from category that should finance the state to category which expect that state will finance them. And this is obviously completely wrong, and it's not sustainable. So that's why we need a tax competition. We need, I don't know, countries like Ireland or Baltics that would have very small tax rate, or countries that will say, okay, we have higher tax rate, but we offer something on the exchange. But this should be fair competition. This should be transparent competition, and not a competition that is made through different provisions that are allowing certain structures to be set up that will just avoid paying tax. And this is unfortunately case from time to time. But I must say at the same time that it's very difficult to flag out what exactly the arrangements are. But very easily you can see the results. If you are living in some country and you suddenly find that the headquarters of the firms, especially holdings, are moving from one country to the other, then you will easily find that there is some tax benefits for them that is reason of such a relocation. Obviously, we can fight with that with different provisions, and we were fortunate to get to reach the agreement on anti-tax avoidance directive. I guess like 4 years ago in European Parliament, and it was implemented, but obviously that's not enough.
Again, moving on, or not moving on, but from your article, one of the options that you proposed or solutions was certain universal VAT across or universal basic VAT that would be implemented in every member state, or EU-wide taxation as a basic calculation in a way. And then the competition or tax competition would not disappear because the countries would remain competitive with that, and certain basic VAT would come to every member state. How is that possible or realistic across the EU?
I would maybe a little bit clarify. This is not VAT, this is corporate taxation, and it's called the CCTB. That means that in Europe we will have the same calculation of taxable profit. So the advantage is that in each country you will have the same rules, what is considered as a revenue, what is considered as the cost, and tax base for taxation will be calculated equally in every state. It has two advantages. The first of all, it will eliminate these special provisions that are set up to allow some firms in some country to have very low taxation, because in everywhere across the country, the EU, the rules will be the same for each corporations. And the second would be huge saving for corporations that are operating across the Europe, because they will have the same tax rules in every country in the Europe. So the result of this system would be that basically on the corporate level, you will calculate the profit equally for corporation in every country, and then each country will apply its own tax rate. So if the company makes 100 in Czech Republic, you will pay 19 tax. If in some other country the tax rate will be 15, you pay just 15. In some country it could be 25 and you pay more. So there will be competition, but this competition will be highly transparent. So this proposal is called CCTB. This was proposed twice by a European Commission. Second attempt was in previous legislation. And despite of kind of controversy about proposal, this proposal have got very strong support by European Parliament, but it was rejected by the finance ministers. You can make the system even better. It's called CCCTB. So that means that the tax calculation will be consolidated. So for firms that is operating in many places in Europe, this calculation of profit will be done on one place for all corporations. And then you will use some so-called allocation formula that would say that corporation has profit 1,000, it operates in Germany, France, Netherlands, and Czech Republic. Out of this 1,000, 300 is Germany, 300 is France, 200 Netherlands, 200 Czech Republic. And for this 200, we will both Holland, both Czech will apply its own tax rate. The advantage of this system would be that it wouldn't make sense for companies to shift profit from one country to the other, because the profit will be calculated for the company as one entity. So economically speaking, in the long run, this is win to win. It's good for corporations because this would save them money for tax compliance. It's good for the governments because it will give them the fair share of the tax revenues. But obviously, short-run effects for some countries would be negative. And because we have the unanimity decision making in case of taxation, that's why the proposal is that. So, but this is not about elimination of the competition. This is about making competition transparent and about obviously huge simplification of the simplification for companies. I can see the question, what is the difference? No, key difference is that in each country, you calculate the profit differently. That's why, for example, now it's not possible, but you have, for example, you had in past different treatment of dividends and cost of debt service. This allows companies to get into one country the tax cost associated, for example, with the debt, while the dividends were paid by affiliated company in other country, and this is country where dividends are not taxed. So the result is in one country you reduce your tax bill, in the other you make a profit that is not taxed. And there are many such provisions. I guess in one country, I guess it happens to be Holland, but I'm not 100% sure. For example, you don't tax the revenues that are coming from the third countries. So what is the logic conclusion? The conclusion is that holding companies of someone who is operating globally is moving the headquarters to this country in order to not pay the tax from the profits that are, for example, coming from China or from the third country, Well, if this headquarter will stay, for example, in the Czech Republic, they will have to pay certain tax on that.
Right. Thanks for the explanation. Maybe one last question, and perhaps it's going to be a little bit hard to answer it, but if you could maybe give a short answer. Sebastian is asking, how big is the role of corporations in lobbying a new tax legislation in the European Parliament?
First of all, I guess in European Parliament, the system is quite transparent because you have lobbyist lists that have to register in order to have access to Parliament and talk to MPs. And MPs that have responsibility within the file, they are, for example, rapporteurs, they should register the contact with them. But what is more important, that basically in every file, you have two different competing groups. For example, if you look at climate issues, you have the group of certain corporations that want to keep the current business, that want to, for example, continue with fossil fuel economy, and you have environmentalists that are very strongly pushing against it. And I must say that from the point of view of the presentation and of the efficiency, they are quite similar. Some of them have better access to left, some of them have better access to right. But what's important is that both camps are providing certain know-how. They are trying to organize events, they are trying to organize hearings, they are sending you different studies that are advocating their points. And at the end of the day, you as MPs, you should make your decision how you vote. So I guess this influence is a reality, and you cannot eliminate it, but you can make it transparent. First of all, transparent on way how it takes place, and the second, transparent on the results. And this transparency is assured by very strong transparency of my behavior. You can see how I was voting. You can see what amendment I was giving, and you can make a judgment if I am not lobbied one of these groups. So I guess there are not so many such transparent places like Europe, but obviously influence is big. Each group have different influence on different political groups. But what is sometimes striking for me is that some of these lobbyists, and here I'm talking especially of big corporations, they are sometimes fighting for something that is not good for them. That is for me very fascinating, because I guess it's inevitable that we are moving more green and that we must take the responsibility for the climate. And the best way how to do it is to have a stable and transparent rules. And sometimes the acts of some lobbyists is leading to result when the rules are not stable and are not transparent. And if even MPs understand that they put together bad rules, then they will change them. So sometimes this lack of understanding what is really my interest, I'm missing that in some of the on some side of the lobbyists. On the other hand, to not be just tough on so-called industrial lobbyists, what is unfortunate is that the other side is sometimes too much stressing kind of symbols. I don't know, you are voting something, the proposal is 30, and they would say, no, 30 is wrong, it's a 50. And then the other would say, 50 is not enough, let's make it 60. Why just 60? We can go for 70. And then you are completely losing the substance, and you are just fighting who will make the best tweet, who will fascinate more the audience, and so on. And this is completely wrong. I guess we should start with the substance. That's why we are very much pushing for the impact studies, the high quality assessment. And then within these high quality assessments, you can make your judgments if you want a little bit more or a little bit less. But sometimes it's getting to absolute extreme. And if you ask the guys who are proposing something that is very tough, you can sometimes find out that they have no idea actually what they are talking about. What is the measure? They just see the figure, and higher figure or low figure is ultimate goal. And they are not very much thinking what is the figure about. And it's frustrating, I must say sometimes.
All right, thank you very much for such explanations. I will now give the word to Zoe and she will ask some questions about the economic challenges of our current pandemic.
We can't hear you, Zoe.
Sorry. Thank you, Ivan. So the next topic is the economic challenges of the pandemic and the recovery plan. So first, I'll just briefly introduce the recovery plan, which was agreed on in July, where the EU leaders agreed on a 750 billion euros recovery effort, which is called Next Generation EU, to help the EU tackle the crisis caused by this pandemic. And alongside this recovery package, there's also a 1,074.3 billion long-term EU budget for the period of next year until 2027. And according to, well, at least the official aims, this budget has to support digital investment and green transitions. So what the Next Generation EU Fund is that it authorizes the Commission to borrow in on the capital markets on behalf of the EU. And then the additional funds raised will then be dispersed to the member states either as grants or as loans. Yes, so according to the EU, or these funds will be used to kind of reach the EU's objectives in climate change and for example, climate neutrality and this digital transformation. And also to reinforce the EU's role as a global player. So my questions for you are the following. So to what extent do you think this Next Generation EU plan can reduce the negative economic consequences of the pandemic? Are they sufficient, and how big of a role can it play into getting kind of the EU back on track, economically speaking?
Well done, Zoe. You explained very well what was on the stake, and I must say at the beginning, later on I will be quite critical on many things, but I must say that this was a great moment when there was an agreement among all 27 finance prime ministers or presidents to go forward. And I will start with the plain economy. I guess we learned very well in previous crises. Then in events like that, it's very important to provide the economy with fiscal support. It's called anti-cyclical fiscal policy. And if you go more into the detail, you would find that this crisis will bring a very substantial drop in investments, because just firms would not invest or wouldn't have money to invest. And one of the efforts of fiscal authorities would be to replace at least part of this drop, to not allow such a deep decline of investment activity and to speed up the recovery of the economy. So we need anti-cyclical fiscal policy. Obviously, I guess all members of European Union will do in their national budgets anti-cyclical policy. Some of them very big one, I guess, 4 or 5% of GDP. That is a lot of money. But we should not ignore the fact that some countries that are not in the great fiscal situation will have quite a restrained space for such a fiscal support. And this is the moment where it makes clear economic sense that even the EU budget will play that anti-cyclical role, so that it will increase the expenditures at the time of the worst crisis, and possibly repay this debt later on when the economy would be going on. There were many proposals of this anti-cyclical role of the European budget, and it never gets far enough to be implemented. So it's now as a one-off implemented during this crisis. So you can look at that Next Generation Europe as kind of rather small. We are talking about altogether like few, let's say 1-2% GDP a year, but kind of fiscal effort to play the anti-cyclical role. And this is economically speaking completely right. Will it deliver the results? It will depend on quality of expenditures. And here again, on the level of the Council, on the level of European Parliament, there is the pressure to invest money wisely. not try to recover or reconstruct economy of last century, but to construct economy of 21st century. So not try to save the firms that were sinking before the crisis and now they are close to the end, but invest into something that has added value. And here the cases are obvious. Obviously, this is climate and environment. This is the digital where Europe is lagging behind. This is for me education. This is research and development. This is for me increase of resilience of European economies and so on. And you would find that everything in the council documents and the very strong call for this direction of these hundreds of billions of euro in European Parliament resolutions or in our statements. But everything will depend on what kind of plans will be put together by the states and how tough will be Commission in refusing the plans that are just inadequate. For example, I have seen the first plan of my government, and I'm not saying that because I'm in opposition. I'm saying that as the economist that is very much interested in economy, in environment, in modernization of the economy. And I would say that this is not the plan to restore and modernize Czech economy. This is the plan how to waste a significant amount of money. So we can just hope that the Commission will be tough enough to say member states, that's not right. This is wrong. If they will be strong enough, if the governments of the EU states will put together good plans, then there will be good result. If not, we will waste some part of this money. Definitely not everything, definitely not huge portion, but this would be pity. But we can achieve two targets. The first of all, to push forward modernization of the economy, and the second, speed up the recovery. And I guess this would be pity not to do it.
Yes, thank you. And then I would like to ask you a bit about budget deficits, because according to the Commission's forecast in spring, their economic forecast, the euro area budget deficit is expected to increase with 8.5% of GDP in 2020. And last year, as a comparison, it was 0.6% of GDP. And the largest deficits are forecast for Belgium, Spain, France, and Italy. And then also on Facebook a few days ago, on the 9th of October, you wrote a post about, this was about the Czech government, but it's still relevant for this issue. Yeah, you wrote, I quote on my probably not very good translation, that the bad news is that the growth of debt was not caused by an economic crisis associated with the pandemic, but by the Czech government's irresponsible budgetary policy, which also means that our deficits will continue even after the economy returns to growth. So related to this, I want to ask you, since there is such a large budget deficit in different member states, either due to the pandemic or not due to it, how likely is it that economic growth will be in the near future? And what is the effect of these extreme budget deficits? And what are the risks involved?
Yeah, okay, sorry, I forgot to address one thing in previous question, if I may. And yes, you said rightly that what is interesting is that the member states agreed on that next generation budget, but they didn't put money into EU budget to finance it. And that's why they just authorized the Commission to take a loan. That is unusual because normally EU budget operates without the loan. And this is kind of typical for EU because they agree on one good thing. So that means to put together next generation EU budget, but they will not agree on the other thing, how to repay the debt. That is a little bit unfortunate. We have some time to go forward and make a good plan how to repay, but it's kind of unusual. This is like if you go to a restaurant and order everything you want to eat, and only later on you think how to settle the bill. That is not responsible behavior. So this is one really negative thing about the decision of presidents and prime ministers to go forward. But going back to national level, obviously, as we all know, EU budget is very small. It's 1 percentage point of GDP. The national budget is 30, 40% of the GDP. So this is a different story. While in Europe, in EU, Commission will take the debt of the size of single digit of GDP. member states will probably emerge with this crisis by 100% debt to GDP. And here the economy gets difficult because, as I said, it's quite obvious that in such bad times, the governments should intervene, should support the economy. And this is not only good for social point of view, but it's good economically, because to prohibit a deep downturn, the spiral of decline of economy is absolutely essential. So that means I'm this year and maybe next year quite flexible on the size of the deficit if I see that expenditures are used for boosting the economy. And ideally, the expenditures are of such a nature that quite soon, maybe 2022, I will be able to consolidate the public finance and stabilize the debt, and later on to push that to GDP lower. The trick is that, and I was just a week ago on OECD debate on crisis economic management, and what they say, and you can see that on figures. During the last crisis, 2008 and 9, many European states were too quick to cut down the deficit, and they slowed down the recovery. So on one hand, I guess this is careful to call for more prudent fiscal policy at the moment when we when we get over the crisis. But first of all, with this crisis, we never know if we are over. But secondly, it would be good to keep the fiscal support a little bit longer to make sure that the economy will get back to robust growth, and then only then start to consolidate very quickly. But as I said, this is that macro point of view. So I'm not very concerned about 6% deficit this year. I would be concerned about 5% deficit next year if we overcome the pandemia. If we don't overcome pandemia, I guess we can also deal with the big one. But then the question is how we stabilize the debt later on, and this will be very, very difficult. You should have in mind one thing that is very strongly in favor of the European government, and this is very low interest rate environment. If you pay nearly no interest on the debt, then cost of increase of the debt is almost zero because you don't pay the interest. But we must also get ready for the moments when the interest rate will not be zero, maybe 1, maybe 2 percentage points. And just basic calculation, if the country will have 100% of GDP debt, if the cost of debt is zero, then your debt service is zero. But if the cost of debt is 2%, then cost of debt service is 2 percentage points of GDP, and that's the big difference. So for the years when the crisis will not be over, I guess we should be flexible, but we should use money wisely. But then we should really start to consolidate and get ready for next crisis. So that's my way how I look at it.
Interesting, yeah. I'd like to ask you a bit about your committee's work, because the European Parliament, and in particular your committee on the economic and monetary affairs, are kind of on the forefront of this whole debate on the recovery from COVID-19, and they're taking part of making and elaborating the European policies and solutions to prevent a deep crisis. So could you maybe tell us a bit on your committee's activities specifically in regard to the Recovery Fund and COVID-19, and what have been the greatest challenges in those debates in this area?
Here I must say that the heads of national governments are making great effort to eliminate too strong influence of not only European Parliament, but also European Commission into how the money will be allocated. One of the frustrating moments was that the compromise to agree on that EU Next Generation budget the cost of this compromise was very high. The prime ministers, in order to be able to come home and say, hey guys, I am bringing €1 billion more, they put out from the budget the items that we consider as the most important. support of R&D, Erasmus, more EU security and things like that. So this was a very high price to pay. And in this context, it's not surprising that the member states want to be as free as possible to use the next generation EU money. And also in ordinary budget, I would say that the changes made on the summit are not changes to better. So it's kind of like power fight when the European Parliament is I would say pushing for right expenditures, the expenditures that will bring something more to Europe as a whole, while the member states are fighting for getting money more from the European budget for themselves, and then later on fighting for having as much of free space as possible how to spend the money. And this is, I must say, a little bit frustrating. So I cannot say that we are able to get significant say. We are approving the legislation, we are approving the rules for using, for example, just transition fund that is important for decarbonization of the region that are heavily involved in coal mining and so on. In these small things, we have big say, but I'm afraid that the member states will be able to push forward the ideas how to spend money that would not be fully in line with the European Parliament point of view. The second area that I guess is very important is to look on the fiscal rules, the fiscal policy in the future. Again, the situation is clear. The fiscal rules must be proposed. If there is a change of fiscal rules, they must be proposed by European Commission, and then they must get very strong support of the member states. Nevertheless, Parliament will try to somehow influence the result. But still, this debate is in very early beginning because we are now in the middle of crisis. The only thing that we know for sure is that the countries will emerge with very high stock of debt, and that too early tightening of the fiscal policy can slow down the recovery. So we have probably at least half a year or maybe even longer to work it out what would be the optimal solution. But in broader picture, I would say that the European Parliament is in most cases fighting for more European solution, while the Council and member states are fighting for keeping the decision in their own hands. One of the long-lasting tension is, for example, a European deposit insurance system within the banking union. This was one of the cornerstones of the project of banking union. I guess this was one of the most important and successful projects of European Union since the last crisis, and still we are very far away from any agreement on this. So this is where we stand. You know, when you have that two-chamber decision, Council and Parliament, it's logical that one is pushing more here, one is pushing more there, and you must find some compromise. But sometimes it seems to me it takes a little bit too much, and that national egoism is playing a little bit more role than would be, I would say, good for finding the good compromise.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I'd like to finish my round of questions for now and then give the floor to Fanny.
Yes, well, this was very interesting also about the budget. And I have one short question concerning how we spend the budget, because we have the EU long-term budget, so which is negotiated now, and we have the Corona Fund as well, which should ideally create jobs, boost the economy, improve education, and be spent for digital projects or the environment. But the question is, the EU's anti-fraud office, for instance, OLAF, said in summer in a report that the European funds in 2019 amounted to fraud of 485 million. So my question is, how can the EU ensure that all these funds are spent correctly and that they end up in the initial place for which they are destined for? And do you think that there is a risk that they will not be spent correctly?
There is always risk. You cannot do 100% things right. You know, that's the reality. But I would say that we are facing two risks. The frauds are not the only risk. You can spend money legal way. You can fulfill all the requirements, but still do the investment that doesn't make any sense. Doesn't make any sense for Europe as such. Doesn't make any sense for your country. Doesn't make any sense for your region. Maybe it makes sense for few people that are around it, and this is also unfortunate. And before the plan for new medium-term EU budget was put in place, everyone talked about European added value, that we must know what is added value of every euro that we used from EU funds. So what it brings, or it brings stronger economy, it brings the better living standard, better environment, climate protection, something like that. I guess it should be obvious. But more you get into the details, you will get into the situation when just each prime minister wants to make sure that he will get from the budget as much as possible. So these are two directions. And I don't want to say that there is not a progress. There is a progress. But sometimes it's difficult. In order to avoid the frauds, you are making the system more complicated. At the end of that more complicated systems, you just don't do some investments that would make sense because, for example, small and medium-sized companies don't have sufficient resources to be able to operate in such a very complicated environment. So while in past, probably the direction was to go through more controls and more complication in the rules, I guess we are on the top of that. We cannot go further. But I guess what's key is that the member states, because it's up to member states to decide how the money are spent, they must take more responsibility. And I guess people like my country, they must understand that country like Holland are putting money into EU budget not to be stolen by criminals or misused by incompetent people, but to bring something good for people of my country. And it seems to me that unfortunately the politicians of country like my Hungary, Bulgaria, or whoever, you name it, everyone, don't take this responsibility. And this is one of the biggest tension within the EU. And unfortunately, this the key problem is not named. I don't think that the Germans, I don't think that even Holland Prime Minister would have such a big problems to put few hundreds of million more into the budget if he would have certainty that this money will be well spent. And this is the biggest problem that we are facing. The frauds are just peak of iceberg, because these are money that are spent not only wrongly, but even the criminal way. But below that, there is quite a significant amount of money that is just invested wrong way. And this is the problem that we are facing. And I guess there should be pressure from EU. There should be pressure for net payers, and more responsibility should be admitted by those who want to use the EU. This is the problem that we are facing.
Yeah, this is very interesting that member states should take more responsibility as well. Thank you for this answer. I'll give the floor back to Zoe, who will talk about the Green Deal now.
Yes, thank you. So we would like to talk about the Green Deal now and the restructuring of the EU's economy. So the European Green Deal is a sort of action plan or roadmap to how to boost the efficient use of resources by moving to a clean circular economy. And it also aims at restoring biodiversity and cut pollution. And then on top of that, the EU also aims to be climate neutral in 2050. And there's been a proposal from the Commission for a European climate law to turn this political commitment into a legal obligation. But then the question is, how politically committed are we really? Because there was a study in Germany commissioned actually by Fridays for Future that found out that Germany would have to invest 6 times more than they are currently doing to meet these climate goals. So my question is twofold. On the one hand, how realistic are the targets of the Green Deal? So is there enough political will, and can we meet the climate goals? And then on the other hand, are the ambitions of the Green Deal and of this roadmap, are they ambitious enough to meet the goal of 2015 climate neutrality? What do you think?
Complicated issue, but the last week, last week actually, we voted for the climate law, and there is quite a strong consensus on the council. So I would say that if you talk about realism of approving the law, I guess it's very, very likely. There will be a little bit of fight about 2030 target, but I guess I would say 90% sure that it will be approved quite quickly. And frankly, climate neutrality is good slogan. And it seems that it's also a successful slogan. I don't know if you know that Chinese actually said they want to go for climate neutrality 2060. That is absolutely amazing. I guess South Africa is talking about climate neutrality, different countries. So it's successful slogan, but it's a slogan. We don't know exactly how to measure the climate neutrality, because you will have always the sector that will be polluting, and you will have to have others that will be withdrawing pollution from the air. So it's tricky. But the most important and tangible is the target for 2030. We had a target for 2020 that I guess was 20%. A few years ago, we approved the target for 2030 that was 40% reduction. Here it's important to say 40% reduction of 1990 level. You know, when people are talking about 55% or 60% CO2 reduction, this is not a reduction between today and 2030. This is a reduction of level from 1990. You know, so we are talking about 40 years of carbon. That's very important to say. But this is important because this is clear target. This is target expressed in numbers that we measure very precisely. And here there is a really question of feasibility. I guess that the recent figures, the last figures are for 2018, 2 years old. And I guess European average was a reduction just 20% compared to 1990, so less than half. Czech reduction was 35%, that's much more. And I guess UK made 40% or something like that. But I guess what's the most promising is that some countries like mine has achieved significant carbon reduction without big effort, because we just killed part of post-communist economy that was very dirty, very heavy, very energy intensive. And then we did a little bit less, a little bit on the carbon reduction, especially through increased cost of energy that forced corporations and households to save. But I guess now we are in completely different setup. We have now so much of technologies that would allow you to reduce the carbon footprint, and we are just starting to implement them. Okay, renewable resources, they are in business for a few years, especially in countries like Germany. But now the cost of renewable energy investment is going so down that they are probably the most competitive as concerned the price. So they will just keep growing. Another area, transportation. Transportation is the biggest source of pollution. Now in practice, we have the cars that have much higher efficiency. The biggest benefit of EV cars is not that they are clean, they are passing you at the road, but they have extremely high efficiency. Efficiency of energy to motion in battery car is around 80%. The best efficiency in combustion engine is 30–35%. So you have twice as high efficiency of this car. And we are just at the beginning. We also improved the ETS system for emission allowances that is pushing the businesses to make the carbon saving. Now basically all houses that are built in the Czech Republic have very low energy consumption, and housing is the second biggest source of the pollution. So I don't know how difficult it will be to reach 55, how difficult it would be to reach 60. But I'm sure that we are now at the moment of change. when we will start to employ new technologies, and these technologies will allow us cost-efficient way to reduce the emissions. That's why I'm not so impressed about hundreds of billions of investments that are set by many people for decarbonization, because at the same time, in the same studies, you will find that decarbonization will bring another hundreds of billions of the revenues. But the availability of technologies is changing so much, and the cost of technologies is changing too. So I guess it's important to clearly say the direction, and I guess we with some luck we will start the clear direction of decarbonization. And I guess the goal, even goal 55, 60, you name it, is within our reach at reasonable cost. And that next generation Europe should be the tool that will speed up these investments, because now without that, neither private or public economy will have money to do the initial investments. Now we can do it.
Thank you. Now I think we're going to go on, and I'd like to give the floor back to Ivan.
Yes, so we're moving to the last topic. Perhaps we'll be able to finish and have a few more questions at the end. But let's look at the European Union from the global perspective. And perhaps I will bring a little bit of the Czech Euroscepticism with this question. But I think it's ought to be asked also from your perspective as an economist. We're looking at one of the biggest rising nations of China basically now, where we are all kind of outsourcing, or main companies were outsourcing China for years, and now that trend is changing. China is becoming much more influential, much more innovative, and is basically far more ahead in innovation, for example, in the e-cars or AI. And yeah, I mean, my question is basically, how can EU remain competitive with China or perhaps with the United States?
Mm-hmm. You know, I guess the situation with China is changing. First of all, we made a huge mistakes in allowing the relationship with China to be unfair and biased. This was mistake of politicians who were willing to accept unfair conditions for our businesses. But this is not the end of the sentence. These wrong decisions were, in my view, I don't have a proof, but these are mostly outcomes of very heavy lobbying by the corporations. For many corporations, probably to sell a few trains to China in next year was more important than pushing for fair relationship. And after they sold 10 trains to China, then China copied them and created hundreds of them, and we wouldn't export anything. So this was a big mistake, and a mistake that we should not repeat. But now we are in completely different situation. Cost of labor in China has increased so much, and the inefficiencies of communist kind of economic management are increasing the cost of corporations too, that we can see a lot of resourcing back. The companies are moving from China to our market, and this is done on pure economical ground, or they move to different countries like Vietnam. So we are definitely behind the peak of that outsourcing losses. So this is where the economy works quite well. And at the same time, I hope that there is more understanding that we are for free trade, the trade without barriers, but it must be fair trade, and it must be symmetrical. And this is still not something that we have with China. And this is just wrong. We are, I guess, improving, but not improving in the sufficient speed. I would say different situation is with the US, because here the relationship is kind of fair. But now we are facing completely different mindset on the side of US compared to ours. We believed in a rule-based system where the multinational institutions like WTO, playing the role of the judge in case of disagreement. While the administration of President Trump rely fully on the power and on the mess, because if there is mess, the power wins. And this is something that is fundamental conflict. And I guess we should stay on our side. We should be assertive in promoting our interest, but we should support that rules-based system, because this rule-based system allow everyone, starting from small, ending with big, to have some predictable conditions for their business. And this is the fundamental difference. And here is also quite important to see if the countries like Australia, Japan, even China or Vietnam will be on our side or on American side. This is kind of battle, but obviously we will see after US elections. But I don't expect that if there will be new presidents that he will completely from the outset will change his approach, because this is something that is just politically speaking hardly to be done.
Thank you very much. Maybe one of the last questions from my side, and something we didn't leave out from the agenda, but it is the reality which was kind of in shadow by the pandemic. But United Kingdom is leaving the EU. Formally, it should leave the internal market on the 1st of January of 2021. You mentioned several cases on your Facebook as well regarding the New Deal. The negotiations. And how is the EU ready for the United Kingdom's leave and exit, basically, from the financial sector or economically in general?
I guess this question is extremely hard to answer these days, or to make a good prediction, because for the first time in many weeks or months, I believe that there is a little bit of chance to make an agreement. The reason why there was not such a chance before was again the philosophical difference. While we looked at the negotiation from the trade point of view, so that means we want to minimize the costs, but at the same time obviously protect our interests. This is how you negotiate any trade deals. And obviously the bigger has a little bit stronger negotiating power, because being bigger, that means that you open bigger markets to smaller. That's natural. This is what you know from foreign affairs trade negotiation. But on the UK side, there was much more ideology. This was very much about symbols. So they would say, okay, we would obviously respect the reasonable rules for the state aid, but we would never commit ourselves to accept certain rules, because this will contradict our sovereignty. And this is impossible negotiation if you don't have very long time during which you will move from that ideological point of view and our pragmatic to something that brings you closer to the compromise. You need a lot of time. But unfortunately, also from ideological point of view, UK committed themselves to make a deal or no deal in a very short period of time. In the last few weeks, it looks that especially UK side start to be more concerned about terrible economic implication of no deal. So if I would say maybe months ago that chances are 20 to 80 to make a deal, I would say now it's 50 to 50. That is great news. It's funny for Czechs. It's not funny for Dutch. For Czechs, it's funny to see that the biggest obstacle is fishing. But those of you who are economists, even from Holland, you must understand that it's completely illogical. How many people are making their life out of fishing? But the point was that especially Boris Johnson make a very strong commitment to fishing community that he will significantly improve their position. And maybe this was the part of voters that actually turned around the referendum. But at the same time, French, Spanish, or maybe even Dutch, they cannot throw their fishers out from the boat. So they must also protect their own interests. So at the end of the day, we have a huge sectors that can very badly suffer. Probably the biggest would be automotive, because UK has quite an automotive sector, despite the fact that none company is owned by British actually, but a huge number of people are working. A huge financial industry, the food industry, if you call whiskey food, you know. So these all are the sectors that can suffer very badly. And we are stuck in fishing because it became extremely strong political subject. And politically speaking, none parties can make give up completely. But as I said, there is a chance, I guess, and this is big change from like months ago. Obviously, economically speaking, bad news and good news, or maybe bad news and bad news. The economy, especially UK economy, but also our economy, is such a mess that to add to big mess one more, you will not notice, because it's just terrible, you know. So that's why people are not so much interested. But I have seen estimates that even for UK, that is probably the most affected economy by the pandemic, the Brexit would be a bigger drag on growth than the pandemic itself. It just is not on front page. When people are dying, people don't care about trade deal. But it's a serious. So I would be happy if we make a deal, but it shouldn't be sacrificed. It must be a deal that reflects our negotiating power. But here I have full trust to Michel Barnier. He's a great guy. When we still were operating, I was meeting him every Strasbourg, and we always chat about it. And he's impressive person. And I guess the biggest problem for British was that he's maybe more British than Brits are. Extremely organized, extremely cultivated, very disciplined. But this is what have to be on EU side, because he's not speaking for himself. He's speaking for 27 presidents and prime ministers. And he made a great deal. And there is a chance to get the deal that will be much better than no deal.
Right. Once again, thank you very much for all the agenda we managed to run through all. Of course, if we would have more time, we would definitely go into more depth and more questions even. But we have 5 minutes. I would like to ask the audience for 1 or 2 questions at the end, because we really would like to finish 7:30, 1 or 2 minutes over. So if anyone has a question that they would like to ask Mr. Niedermayer now, they can write it into the chat. Otherwise, we will slowly say hello, good night, and yeah, the floor is now for the audience for a little bit. Yes.
Hi, good evening. Yeah, sorry, I think I'll be terribly slow writing the question in the chat, so perhaps it's a bit quicker if I do this before we finish. Yeah, on your last topic, actually, when you just started to dive into the Brexit withdrawal agreement, and you seem to know that perhaps the current situation has improved the chances over the last year of a new deal coming out. How would you compare this idea with the, I'd say, the current push of the British government to push out current EU law standards and the agreement that they signed 2 years ago? Do you think there will be more of a political pressure from Brussels to make sure they enforce these international laws? Or do you think they could get away with it and with this increase the chances of a deal?
I guess what's obvious that Michel Barnier, the Council and Parliament cannot deliver and support the deal that will be disadvantageous for European businesses. So we must be sure about level playing field. And I guess the Brits understand well that if they will be providing, for example, state aid that is off the limits of EU, the firms that will get the state aid will not be able to compete at the EU market. I guess this is obvious. They understand. The real problem in all this negotiation was not the fact itself, it was commitment. Because they said that any kind of commitment, or at least I believe they say, any kind of commitment will breach the sovereignty, because they see by the sovereignty the possibility to do whatever they want. If they have in Monday some idea, they will do it in Tuesday, in Wednesday they will change it and end up with the same next week on Monday, you know? And this is the problem, because we want a predictable rule-based system. So I would not say, and British are incredibly competent. The public sector is one of the most competent across EU. They understand the well, but there was this philosophical difference. I don't think that they had intention that they will undercut the European market and they will compete unfair way. They just believe that to make such a commitment is against that notion of sovereignty. I don't think that these days that they are under pressure of Brussels, because some people maybe still in UK believe that reach this agreement is politically good, because this will show how strong they are, how much they are pushing for UK interests. But I guess that the British businesses are much more vocal in explaining the cost. This was a huge difference between Theresa May and Boris Johnson. Theresa May and her staff, they were talking to business, and they understood that in order to protect the jobs, protect the economy, they must be pragmatic. And I would say in Theresa May, the pragmatism was first. She was very loyal to Brexit, but she was pragmatic. She doesn't want to see thousands of British people being laid out from the jobs and the millions losing the salary, you know. But for Boris Johnson, symbols are everything, and this was the program. So if they are able somehow to overcome at least a little bit of that sovereignty ideology, we can make a deal. In fishing, it would be much more difficult, but in that state aid, that was the second biggest topic, I guess we both understand each other very well. And I guess we both would be understand on the result, but the question was that symbol, the commitment. They believe that sovereignty means that we don't make the commitment. I guess it's completely wrong. This was wrong in 20th century. It is wrong in 21st century, even more.
Okay, thank you very much for your answer and for the rest of your speech. It's been very insightful.
So it's 7:31. I'm afraid we'll have to finish now. I would like to thank you again. It was a great honor to have you, and thank you all for attending. I hope you got to know something about Luděk Niedermayer or about the European economy. And I would like to give a word for a little bit just to Francesca. She will introduce the next debate, which is coming in 2 weeks.
Ivan, if I may, before Francesca, first of all, you know, you understood that I'm quite an informal person, so I'm not playing any political games with you. So I just express my opinion. So take it as it is. And the second time, very impressed by how well you prepared for the discussion, you Ivan, Zoe, Francesca. So I highly appreciate that. And I guess we don't agree. Everyone doesn't agree with everyone, but it's very important to have good debate, to be able to listen to each other, to be able to ask a good question. This is exactly what you did. So it was my great pleasure to be here, and I wish you good luck in future debate.
Yes, thank you so much for coming. It was very insightful, and it was a great pleasure that you had time to join us.